Okay, before we embark on the question and answers, and we'll probably take about 15 minutes to do that and then get to lunch. I know you're all dying for lunch. I just want to mention that we heard three great talks regarding data creation, data governance, and all of the social, cultural, and technical issues around data. STM does a great job in following the data community through our Director of Standards and Technology, Evka Smit. And I urge you to go to the STM Association website, click on the relevant links there for the Standards and Technology Committee, and especially the links about data, and follow the efforts of STM within the whole data community. Additionally, I urge you to follow the activities of the Research Data Alliance, or the RDA, which would be a good way for you to introduce some of the issues that we're grappling with as an industry, and urge that you send your appropriate technical and business people to future RDA meetings. So with all that, do we have questions from the audience for any of our panelists? I see one in the back there, please.
Hello, Peter Ashman, BMJ. This is a question about data availability. On the BMJ, we have a policy where we'll only accept a research article if the author agrees to make their full data set available of that publication, and we work with Dryad on that. And I've tweeted a link to the BMJ Open Data campaigns, but if anybody wants just to search BMJ Open Data. The question really is, what should we as publishers be doing to either encourage or mandate authors to make their full data sets available? In medicine, it's particularly an issue because we know that hidden or suppressed data could actually end up in costing lives, and that's in the BMJ Open Data campaign. But what about in other fields? What do the panel think of the role that we as publishers should play in encouraging authors to make their data sets available?
Sure. Panel? Yeah.
The medicine certainly has the strongest argument for making data available, particularly things like clinical trials data. And I haven't seen it yet, but the Institute of Medicine has a new report out on open access to clinical trials. And they really laid out the difficulties. I mean, there's no question about everything from fraud, partial release, saving the lives of research subjects in clinical trials and so on. And yet there's many pressures that augur against releasing those data. So it's a partnership. If the publishers and the community kind of align, then you've got the kind of power it's going to take to make this happen. I think it's not going to, the publishers alone are not going to be able to convince the community that it's in their best interest, and the community is going to need the backing of the publishers. But I think also we need to have repositories, because the publishers are not likely to be the repositories. I assume that BMJ is putting data in NIH, Wellcome, other kinds of repositories. I'm linking to it. Is that correct? Yeah. So you got a multi-way partnership of investing, and our experience in the various fields we've looked at is similar to what Meredith's is that data sharing mandates are necessary but not sufficient, unless that in the absence of mandates you get very low compliance, and even when you do have them, we've got those reports by the Stanford Medical School team, Ioannidis, and that group, showing that the compliance itself is actually not as complete as it might be.
I could also, just add, and I believe that, there's a slide about this, but specifically implementing a data availability statement with your manuscript submission system is a way to allow for some automation and provide an area for the author to provide information about the data set. And then it'll be more useful to actually go back and check. And various checks on whether or not the data set has been supplied really differs based on the journal and based on their policies. So they're all going to be individual, but so that each journal could have a policy of what that check would look like and what would they expect. And so we're finding that statement really does make a big difference as far as providing the data underlying the work.
David?
Hi, Dave Martinson from the American Chemical Society. I wonder if you could comment a little bit on the relationship between curation and peer review. I would have said that the statement that a database or a data set is highly curated would mean that there's some trustworthiness about it and the data there are good. But from what I've heard this morning, it seems like there may be two separate things happening here, that I could have a highly curated database where no one has ever even looked at the data, and that we're not sure exactly what review of the data means. So could you kind of explain that a little bit more?
So the question, as I understand it, is the relationship between curation and peer review. Certainly those are not synonymous terms in any means. Curation can range from the very formal archival kind of model where somebody is doing all that kind of checking on things to what they call author curation, where it's as good as whatever the author submits. So very often the author may submit a package, and as long as it, the checksums and everything pass muster, that's considered curation. The archivists in areas like the social sciences will go through and say, if this says n equals 769 and we only find 543, where are the other ones? And I mean, that's where the year comes in of spending the time doing that. That's a very expensive process, and I'm not sure how many repositories actually are doing that. But the curation that an archivist can do is things like, running checksum, saying, is everything here supposed to be, does the data set appear to match the code book? That's different from the kind of peer review and face validity that happens, say, with a journal article where someone is going through and saying, are these data scientifically valid? Are they reliable? Because you're not going to go back out in the field and collect new observations. At what point is curation anything that looks like peer review? So I think, again, that's something that's going to vary hugely from field to field. But curation in the archival sense tends to be more, does it include what the package says it includes, as opposed to something that's really a scientific validity check, which is what peer review would be on a journal manuscript.
You nailed it. She nailed it.
Okay, I have one final question, actually. Perhaps this is the $64 million question. It seems that there's so we have this growing body of data, and this data is being created by people that we serve as publishers. In a world where our own margins in publishing are not as great as they certainly were in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, and we're facing challenges with open access, decreasing revenues. The mergers and acquisitions are causing some financial consolidation within companies. So, given this atmosphere, who is in the best position to create a data repository? Will it be the institutions, the universities? Will it be corporations? Will it be a whole new business that springs up that offers curation, stewardship, storage forever and ever? It doesn't seem to me that this is a healthy margin business.
Well, I think that communities surely have varying ways of creating repositories. There's certainly the very safeguarded, respected institutional repositories such as ISCPR that you mentioned before, and quite a few of those. And they all have sort of different roles. There's commercial repositories. I think if this is I'm trying not to skirt around it, but I think it's really up to different communities to try to evaluate what's the right structure. Dryad's beginning, I can only talk about our experience, was based on NSF grant, but that grant had required a sustainability plan from the beginning, which is a little bit unusual for some of those grants. So our organization was created into a nonprofit with a board, with stakeholders and organizational members, and those members are actually publishers, institutions, journals, societies, those stakeholders, and they will be impacting the governance of the board and the mission and the vision, so that there's the goal to be trusted and transparent with our decisions, and to also have an opportunity where, for instance, a community meeting I mentioned, where groups can get together and develop these emerging policies and discover what different groups are doing with review and what does that even mean. And, we're doing some kind of curation, but it's basic curation. It's not the real archivist curation. And when do you need that? And have those discussions, because it's kind of an emerging issue, and will continue to evolve, just as publishing has continued to evolve and surely will not stop. I think that there can be some challenge with funding is certainly an issue, and what Dryad tries to do is really be transparent again and be upfront and say this activity has some cost associated with it, and this is the model that we've come up with. And I think other repositories have different models, but as long as they're able to come out and describe it and explain it, to me it seems fairly fair game.
I think that the value proposition is the $10 billion question. I think we're well beyond the $1 million question.
Maybe 25.
Maybe 25.
25.2 billion.
It's a big number, whatever it is. And we're going to see different solutions not only by community but by country. I mean, you look at the European countries that fund higher education centrally, you're going to see different kinds of, we're already seeing different kinds of solutions than we see in the U.S., which is highly decentralized in the way that higher education is funded. But I think there's another part that hasn't come up yet today, and that's just the very notion of a community, which I do spend a good bit of time on in the book, is people float from, whatever community means, and all your archiving rules say on behalf of the community, but people are part of many different communities, and they move fluidly through the course of career from one to the next, and collections are going to outlive communities. And the funding of things like, we did digital libraries, right? Tim and I are part of the anchors, the digital library community. Well, we had our 10 years of funding, and then we had to call it something else. And so it becomes a different set of, it becomes something different over time. And this is one thing that libraries are very concerned about, is the collection is going to outlast the community. And so we can't just say the community is going to take care of it, because that's just thrown over the wall to something else, I think.
Yeah, and I would add, I don't know that anybody is going to take care of it. I think just like everything else in our world, we have a market that needs to bear, the costs of repositories, and we have funding models that are, as someone mentioned, generally focused in these. I think you mentioned it, Chris, in these 3 to 5 year cycles that don't comport with reality, the reality of publication or use, and maybe I'm even, a little more cynical than your comment about changing the name of what we used to call digital libraries. But I think hard decisions need to be made, and a public or a funding source, a market, needs to be convinced that what we're producing is valuable. And I think the way to do that is to demonstrate value, and continually demonstrate value and show the benefits of actually having the content that's in these repositories, some of which will never be touched, but some of it will lead to new discoveries and important things in regular people's lives.
Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you, panel, for your thought-provoking presentations today. And most of all, thank you, audience, for sticking with us the extra 15 minutes. I believe it's lunchtime. Evka, do you have a few words for us?
Sure. My first word is thank you all for a great session.